What's up, guys? Hope you guys had a good weekend. So, as always, I'll start with the economic calendar, and then I'm also going to go into. I kind of want to go over what happened last week, just in terms of Mag 7 earnings, and I think how that switches the theme going forward a little bit. Um, but yeah, economic calendar for next week. So, couple key economic data coming in at the end of the week. Initial jobless claims and CPI being the most important Thursday, Friday. Non-farm should be decent on Wednesday, but ideally just note the reactions that you could have at 8:30 in the morning, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Nothing really to play off of. Just note for trades you're in. Earnings this week, we do have quite a few companies that I'll be focused on, just in terms of, I do have a position in some of these. So we have a net on Thursday, we have VRT on Wednesday, A Lab Tuesday. All three of those I'll be a little extra focused on, just because I do hold positions, but a lot of good names to kind of dictate, again, just how the market's doing. You have retail names, you have AI infrastructure names, you have semis names, you have software names, you have industrial names, you have health names. Kind of a very broad week in terms of who's reporting, but again, they all give clearer pictures. So just something to note, just for positions as well. Don't want to be in something that reports this week. um, but yeah, let's get into some setups. So before we get into anything, I do kind of just want to go over those Mag 7 reports. So let's look at let's just look at mags, just to keep it as simple as possible. So this is obviously a ETF of the Mag 7 stocks. So if we're looking at this, just in terms of where this is, right? Bottom of the trend, looks like it wanted to break out, trying to hold up. But if you compare that to SPY, much better structure in terms of where it is, in terms of all-time highs, where it is with the moving averages. It's just a better structure overall. It's much stronger. So that's something to note with Mag 7s. On those reports last week, you had good reports, but these companies are spending $200 billion plus. I think you have about 600-700 billion in CAPEX spending from those Mag 7 companies. So Tesla, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, all those big players. So that's something to note in terms of where money's flowing to. Especially because the S&P 500 still looks quite strong after Friday. So where is that money flowing to? That's the real question. Electrical equipment, semi hardware, that entire, you kind of shuffle down the entire data infrastructure build out that these companies are spending the capex on. So that's going to be, when I say electrical equipment, that's coming down to electrical hardware, yes, but also energy solutions, energy storage, stuff of those aspects as well. And then obviously semis, so semiconductors, and then semi hardware companies as well. So I kind of just want to note some strength that we're getting. So, if you look at energy names, GEV, significantly tied to large, gigawatt orders for AWS and Google as well. You look at VRT. VRT kind of sits in a big niche. It's kind of like a semi hardware, energy, electrical equipment type of company. So this one's building a great, fantastic base. Wow. So just something to note with strength. You have GEV, VRT, you have power, making new highs. Couple other ones in there. Fix, huge electrical contracting company for these data centers. And then you have Powell, which is more of like the actual electrical equipment hardware. But just note how strong all of these are. Not only are they at all-time highs, they've been at all-time highs kind of almost the entire time we saw that correction on SPX and QQQ, or across the whole market. So stuff like this is where you start pulling out relative strength. If SPY and QQQ do start following through to that upside, this is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of what can really move. So again, GEV, Power, Fix, Powell, VRT, all fantastic names that are going to benefit from that CAPEX spending from Mag 7. And then semis and hardware, you get into, A Lab. ALAB had a great character change on Friday. By character change, I mean, you know, you can argue this candle kind of switched the trend of where this stock was heading. You know, it looked like it was heading for new lows, good gap up, great trend day, great switch in volume, reclaim the moving averages, earnings coming up, you know, all of a sudden in one candlestick, this has a different theme running with it. So, you know, ALAB, AVGO, obvious one, not getting as much love. So something to note here if it does start basing. No plays though, just kind of want to show you strength. NVIDIA as well, obviously. So NVIDIA, if you had any question on kind of where the switch was, you know, some people could have argued, oh, they're just selling Mag 7s to buy other stuff that went down. No, it's strictly off CAPEX. You know, NVIDIA is a Mag 7 stock that went up because of that, because it's going to have, you know, $400 billion plus being influxed into it with this CAPEX spending. So little stuff like that really helps you dictate where money's flowing to right now. And then TSM, just another one to note as well. Really good base here. We got a setup on TSM and NVIDIA that we'll go over in a second. But those are just the companies to note that are really benefiting. There's tons more, but it's that theme that's really going to benefit. Electrical equipment, you know, energy solutions, and that semi hardware to build out those data centers. But yeah, let's get into some individual plays now. I'll start with Apple. So Apple had a really good run after earnings, and this is another one to note. So really good earnings report. I mean, like absurd beats on their phone sales for China, and didn't really gap up, but showed you a really good range. So you know, Apple earnings was here. I believe they gapped up to like 260 something, and then came back down. That's showing you a range that something has the potential of moving after earnings. You know, after earnings, especially good earnings and no movement, those are the potential you have for those really big days. So just something to note for the future. Um, but yeah, what a push from Apple the past few days. So honestly, what I'm looking for here, 272 was a decent line in the sand. It was a little choppy over here, but what I'm looking for is kind of this convergence point that we might be getting. You know, granted, let's see how tight this stays, but we could get, you know, 50 MA coiling up a little bit. Hopefully, this 9 MA can get back over it. But if Apple can meet around 272, you know, you're starting to look at three forms of support, you know, versus a fairly good upside before you hit any resistance. So you know, not saying it's going to go up, but great spot in order, you know, for a shot to take calls back to the upside. So I'll be looking if it converges with these moving averages and right off this quarterly. And then you could have running stops, you know, let's say Apple comes under it, closes back over it on the daily, you know, you could have running stops under those lows. But this one needs a couple more days to develop. But I like the potential low volume pullback it can make here. So we'll keep an eye on that. VRT honestly would have been great if it didn't have earnings. So I'll leave that one out. ALAB. ALAB also has earnings, another one that would have been great. AVGO, here we go. Let's take a look at AVGO. So what I was really watching here, you know, what you can tell when you zoom out, clear support. You know, this 330 area was a clear wall for some time. So what I'm looking at now is, okay, we cracked below. We cracked below on big volume, but we didn't stay there quickly at all and reclaimed this 330 quite fast. So what I'm looking for here is, and it's a similar setup to all of these after you get a Friday bar like that. You want to see them retrace, number one, but you want to see how they retrace. You know, is it aggressive? Does AVGO just fail at this 330, you know, fairly quickly right off the open on Monday? Or is it a low volume pullback? You know, do we get a daily close in between here? Does this tighten up? Does this close over the 9 MA, over the 21? So we still need a little more information on a lot of these trades. You know, it's especially after, again, that Friday close, you're kind of just chasing if you're looking to grab stuff off the open. So we do need a little more development here, but I'm really liking this V-shaped recovery, especially after the news and with it being at such an inflection point in terms of how hard this level is. So again, needs a little more development, but that 330 is going to be a big level I watch this week in terms of how it holds up. And then NVIDIA as well. NVIDIA has been basing for 7 months. 7 months here, and it's giving you a clear range. 169 clear low, 192 clear high. It's faked you out a couple times on both sides, but you're getting to a point where this candlestick gave you that nice character change, closed above all the moving averages. Ideally, again, this base is in between here, and you might get a good trade from 187 to 193. I'll actually probably be looking for this. And then I will be looking to sell at 193, just because I'm assuming it would stop first attempt. You have to assume that just with price action. But if this can give you a day or two, close at the top half of this range, this big candle range, I'll be looking for that breakout at 187 for this little $5 move right here. But yeah, through 192, I don't see why this doesn't start running to that 212. Needs a little more time, but yeah, you got a clear character change. This one you could almost put side by side with ALAB. Kind of looks very similar here. But yeah, two semi-hardware themes to kind of note there, just in case we do start breaking out. Other than that, let's see. I did want to look at TSM. So TSM is honestly the best bet in terms of, no earnings, tight setup already. That's kind of been in a consolidation phase. This one's giving you kind of the best risk to reward, in my opinion. Friday was a great one off the 9MA. So again, ideal scenario, this still gives you a day or two, but this 351 will certainly be a crucial line. Ideally, this tests first attempt, and then you can look for a second attempt breakout here. Let me look at this on a lower time frame. Very tight action, and I love this little liquidity sweep here. Broke a bunch of lows, broke structure, and came right back higher. Similar theme with everything. But ideally, if this does break through first attempt here, this is still not the best risk to reward. So unfortunately, I'll probably have to sit it out. If it does break through 351, though, I will be looking for that back test and what it does there. If it does hold, I'll look to go long. If it does fail, you could go short. Those are trades, but ideally, I'll look to chill. So, really, really tough week in terms of actionable setups. Monday, Tuesday. This seems like a week where more structured movement might happen Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, especially with those economic data points. So, be patient the first half of this week. Don't really look to go aggressive. Just I would focus more on, if we do retrace, how aggressive are we retracing? If we do continue, are we just respecting levels? Is everything moving together? That kind of helps dictate what's real and what's not. But yeah, two other things I actually do want to note here, just in terms of movement standpoint and what's possible. So, looking from a whole theme perspective, ASTS, space theme. ASTS held the key 92 level, 93 level on Thursday and Friday, and held. So you have that combined with PL, another space stock, tested 50 MA and quarterly, held. So you have that combined with RDW, tested 50 MA, held, tested quarterly, held, and Lunar, tested 50 MA, held. So, I'm assuming you can understand what I'm getting at here. Not really necessarily the full, the strongest in terms of relative strength, but when you have the entire, the most popular names in a certain sector, all testing and holding key support levels. Again, not saying they do go up, but if you were to weigh the upside versus the downside, all four stocks have to break through multiple support levels altogether for the space sector to fail now, versus the upside where they all have room to either, key quarterly or key monthly levels, moving averages, just room to the upside with nothing really blocking it as hard as the downside. So just little stuff to note like that. ASTS looks the best of the bunch. I don't know if you noticed that level right there. 102.79 is that previous all-time high. So hold of 92. If you get that follow through with the space sector and ASTS does start getting back over this 103, you could get that follow through back over the 9MA and then a move back towards that 120. But yeah, the space plays are still kind of on a back burner for me. Just because we are still under, you have to look at it logically. We're still under all the moving averages for everything I just showed you. They're kind of all just at a key, conversion point. There's actually one I forgot to note for space. Huh, that's funny. So you look at Rocket Lab as well, right off of quarterly, right off of 50MA. It's really hard to assume that these all follow through to the downside. And even if they do, that's the beauty of a trade like this. Your stop losses is tight. You can play Friday's lows, prior bar lows, anything under that weakness. So your stops are established, and you have the same action across an entire theme. So just something to note. Final notes. So another one that's kind of been a major theme, semis. Memory. So memory is still setting up. A lot of people might just this is a key part for memory. You have stuff that's ran 200-300%, and a lot of what I'll notice is people will start taking it off their watch list. Either oh, it's gone up too much, or oh, it's too expensive, or I can't trade it. All that stuff. Nobody's better than the 9 and 21 MA. So understand, if it's over and it's a leading stock, you should be focused on it. If you're a trader, you have to always be in tune with momentum and what's moving. So let's take a look at this memory theme. So when I think of the memory theme, I think of this, the major four, call it the Fantastic Four: WDC, SNDK, MU, and STX. So if we take a look at all of these right now, let's start with the grandmaster of the run, MU. So MU does seem to be the weakest of the bunch in terms of where it is on the moving averages, where it is on the chart. Held the 21 quite nicely last week, so you have to look at that still. And then you have clear resistance above with that 414 monthly level confluencing with that 9MA. So MU, little room to the upside, not much resistance. It's really just that inflection point there. But still holding the 21. Now you look at SNDK. I'm really liking this close on Friday from SNDK. Just this 2 really tight days of action after that little broad sell-off back down to the 9. And again, you can't not play the 9. This thing was over the 9MA for what, 3-4 months. You're coming up on 2 months now. So ideally this has another month or 2 to run before it even starts thinking about basing. And this is another good example of, if you look at the earnings reports, you look at the fundamentals, this is another one. I said it with GE, it almost has to go up. It's undervalued, especially in a market like this. You're not going to find a lot of stuff that is this undervalued. And a lot of people will look at it and be like, what do you mean undervalued? You have to look at earnings reports. You have to. They almost doubled their beat. They still said there's more coming. They were looking at upwards of 10 to 11 for next quarter. If they beat that, and they still said further guidance is coming, if they beat that, this is $1,000 stock, no problem, no questions asked. Very similar to SMCI. And look what that one did. People forget about SMCI. Let's look at this one. Look at this base. It's very similar. SMCI was also very clean. Pre-split, this is 370 to 1,200 on a straight run in almost a month. So don't think it's not possible. So SNDK and MU, I do also have a pretty large position in going into next week. I have calls for, I believe I have 700 calls on SNDK for the end of the month, I believe the 27th. And I think I took MU, I want to say 400s for the end of the month as well. But yeah, I'm really trying to play that 9MA bounce here. That's the main theme going into those 2 swings. And then you also, you combine that with WDC. There's another one I'm waiting for Monday, Tuesday. I'm really liking the setup. This is giving you the best entry as well in terms of where the weekly is, or where the 9MA is. Sorry. WDC is really tight. MU is really tight. SNDK is really tight. WDC through this 285, likely that's a magnet to that 296 again, and launches of this 9MA. So I'll be looking at that again, for that confluence with SNDK and MU. So WDC actually might be the only actionable play that I could see myself entering, Monday, Tuesday, in terms of what's set up. So let me take a look at STX. I forget if that one was set up right away, but WDC is looking like the focus point for the beginning of the week. STX as well. Perfect. So this is really what you want to look for. I'm already in SNDK and MU, so maybe I'll look for a little follow through before I start playing these. You can argue I'll still focus on WDC, because then what I can do also is, if they do start moving, let's say, SNDK's rallied and then STX starts approaching this level and starts breaking out, maybe with SNDK also starting to break out, that's where I can start taking off SNDK and MU and start scaling those profits into, where they might move money into, which is STX and WDC. They seem to move a little after SNDK and MU. But just something to note. So STX and WDC, really the only plays I can see right now with an actionable entry that could possibly happen Monday, Tuesday, which is good. My focus is clear. That allows me to just watch SNDK and MU. So, kind of closing thoughts here. The focus for me from last week was still memory. That switched Friday after I saw that action from those electrical equipment and those semi-hardware companies. So ideally, I'll be looking for, again, those tighter entries in terms of, how they retrace. If I could get 1 or 2 days of consolidation, on a GEV, on a Powell, on a AVGO, NVDA, TSM, anything like that. If I can get that entry, I'm definitely going to be looking to add those for the week. Other than that, I'll keep writing memory, and I will also keep an eye on ASTS for that breakout over 104 if the rest of the space sector looks good. So yeah, not a lot, but a good focus, on stuff that can move fairly quickly. So be ready, have a plan, understand what's moving, and formulate your plan around that. But yeah, I'll see you guys.